and Pharmaceuticals in association with Higher Secondary Principals Forum.
Welcome back, students. I am Shruti Naik from St.Xavier Higher Secondary School, here again with you to discuss part 2, the second session of the chapter which we had discussed earlier, that's human reproduction. In the last class, students, we learned about the male reproductive system, female reproductive system and gametogenesis, that's spermatogenesis in male and oogenesis in females. So, we will take a quick recap of what we did in the last class. We had discussed about the male reproductive system and the different organs which are involved in this system. Okay, the first one, that is testis, which is called as the primary sex organ in males and which is involved in production of gametes, that's sperms, and it is involved in the production of hormones like, for example, testosterone and inhibin. Then there are different parts which are accessory to the primary sex organs. The testes is located in a pocket-like structure called scrotum. And what does this scrotum do? It is involved in maintaining the right temperature which is necessary for the testes. That is almost around 2 to 2.5 degree lesser than our normal body temperature, because which is necessary for the sperms to keep motile and fertile. Then there are accessory ducts, okay, like if you take a cross section of a testes, we had discussed the parts of it. Inside the testes there are testicular lobules, okay, compartments basically, and inside these compartments there are long tubules called as seminiferous tubules, okay. Now these seminiferous tubules are connected to a duct or again the next tubule, that's rete testis. The rete testis is connected to the vasa deferentia. The vasa deferentia opens it into the epididymis. Now what does the epididymis do? What are these ducts do? Basically they are involved in the transformation or transportation of the sperms, maturation of sperms and storage of sperm. Especially the epididymis is the site for sperm maturation and storage. Then you have efferent ducts which connect the testes, rather the tubules to the ejaculatory ducts, okay. Then is the external genitalia of the men, that's penis, which is a erectile organ which is involved in the sexual intercourse. Then accessory glands are the ones which add on to the secretions to the sperms, like for example seminal vesicle is a paired accessory gland which secretes fructose and most of the seminal fluids. Then you have a prostate gland, okay, which secretes watery alkaline fluid to raise the pH, and you have a bulbourethral glands, okay, which secrete the lubricating mucus. Coming to the female reproductive system, which consists of paired ovaries, which is primary sex organs in female, and here it's a site for storage of and the development of oocytes, okay. The ovaries are connected with the oviduct, okay. They are the ducts basically involved in the transporting of the oocyte from the ovary to the uterus, okay. And it's a duct which is the site for fertilization. If you recollect the parts of the duct, you had the infundibulum, the isthmus and the ampulla. It's the ampulla isthmus junction where the fertilization takes place. Then you have the uterus. It's a hollow chamber where the embryo develops. Okay, once the pregnancy is held, the embryo develops inside the uterus. Followed by the uterus is the cervix, which is a canal which connects the uterus to the vagina. And vagina is an organ for sexual intercourse and it produces the lubricating fluids, okay, and it is also termed as birth canal, okay. Next, going on to the gametogenesis, let's summarize the entire gametogenesis, that's oogenesis and spermatogenesis. If you look over here, you have a oogonium, which is formed in females at prenatal stage, that's much before the birth. Okay. Now these oogoniums divide by means of mitosis. Make a note, students, these oogonias are diploid cells. Okay. Now these oogonias will divide mitotically and will form primary oocytes. Okay. And these primary oocytes, they enter meiosis, but they get arrested in the first part of meiosis 1, that's prophase 1. Okay. So when the female child is born, they have primary oocytes in the ovary in which they are arrested at the prophase 1. When the female reaches the puberty, it completes meiosis 1 to form the secondary oocyte. So out of say about by the 3 months of pregnancy, a female infant, the fetus, has around 1 million to 2 million oocytes arrested in the prophase 1. So here at the puberty, what happens is only few oocytes complete meiosis 1 every month. Okay, and that's called as ovulation. So the meiosis 2 actually happens when the secondary oocyte meets the sperm. Okay, only when the sperm enters the oocyte, the secondary oocyte will complete its second meiosis. It will form the ovum and the second polar body. Now, two places the polar bodies are formed. Here the first polar body and here the second polar body. The polar bodies are not involved in production of gametes. Okay, it is said that they disintegrate once they are formed. Coming to the spermatogenesis, the difference you can see here, spermatogenesis begins after the birth, after the male reaches puberty. So you have the spermatogonium cells which are derived from the germ cells, the germinal epithelium of the seminiferous tubule. Now this spermatogonium will undergo mitosis and they will increase in number and will form something called as primary spermatocytes. Okay. Now this primary spermatocytes during puberty, it will undergo meiosis 1 to form secondary spermatocytes. And these secondary spermatocytes, if you recollect the structure of the seminiferous tubule, they will undergo, they will move and go into and get embedded into the Sertoli cells which provide them the nutrition, and they will gain its structure, the shape and the form, and then they will form a spermatids and the spermatid will mature into the sperm. So this is the process of oogenesis and spermatogenesis. So end of this we have the gametes which are formed, that is sperm and the egg. So this is where we have discussed gametogenesis, that's the production of the male and the female gametes. Okay, the male sperm and the female ovum is produced. Now as I mentioned here, students, the female ovum is released every month. Okay, so it's a cyclic event. Fine. Now before that, before going to the next part, that's the menstrual cycle, we shall deal with the difference with the spermatogenesis and oogenesis. Okay. Now location, where does it occur? Spermatogenesis occurs in testes, oogenesis in ovaries. Meiotic division, in spermatogenesis it's equal division, whereas here it's unequal division of cytoplasm, because there is only one gamete which is formed and then the second polar body. Okay. So the germline epithelium inside the seminiferous tubule, the germinal epithelium involves in the gamete production, whereas inside the ovary the germline cells does not involve in the production of the gamete. How many gametes are produced from one cell? From one spermatogonium, 4 sperms, whereas here only one primary oocyte is undergoing meiosis for the 2 times and it will form only one ovum. Okay, and there are 2 to 3 polar bodies which are formed which will disintegrate. Then the size of the gametes, the sperm is smaller than the spermatocytes, whereas the egg which is formed, the ova, is larger than the oocyte. The sperm is motile, whereas the ova is non-motile. Duration, spermatogenesis, once it begins at puberty, it is uninterrupted process, whereas In oogenesis, you can see it is arrested at different age or different stages. First before birth, then during the birth, then at the puberty. Okay. So here it begins at puberty, and this begins at the prenatal stage in the fetus itself. The release of the sperm is continuous once it is started, whereas the release of the ova is monthly from puberty. Okay. And the end of it, the sperm production is lifelong. Once the man starts producing sperm, it can produce till its death. Okay. But it reduces with the age. Whereas in females, once the female reach certain age, we term it as menopause, okay, it terminates. The production of the ova terminates at the menopause. So here, like how we mentioned, the production of the ovum is monthly, and the cycle is called as menstrual cycle. So now we shall discuss the menstrual cycle, which is termed as reproductive cycle. Okay. It's a cyclic event starting from menstruation till the next reproductive period, and when it starts from the puberty till the menopause. Okay. Now there are 4 phases of the menstrual cycle. If you look at here, the luteal phase, the menstrual phase, follicular phase, and the ovulatory phase. The first period, which we call, okay, the first cycle when it begins, the first menstruation during the puberty, it begins at the puberty at the age around 11 to 12 years, and it is termed as menarche. The first menstruation is termed as menarche, whereas the last one, it occurs around 50, age of 50, the menstruation stops, and it is called as menopause. Okay. By the time from 12 years to 50 years, menstruation can take place. That's the reproductive phase of the females. Okay. The duration of each menstrual cycle is roughly around 28 to 29 days. It might change plus 1 to 2 days depending upon the person. Okay. Menstrual cycle also occurs in primates along with us the human beings. Even primates undergo menstrual cycle. Now if you look at the events, the changes taking place in the menstrual cycle, the menstrual cycle can be divided in 2 events. Okay, that's ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle. So if you see here, ovarian cycle is the changes occurring in the ovary, whereas the uterine cycle is the changes in the uterus. That's uterus, oviduct and vagina. So if you look at here, the first part over here is the ovarian cycle. Now if you recollect the section of the ovary, we had discussed the follicles which are maturing. Okay, the follicular phase, you can see the follicle grows. Then once the follicle matures, the ovum which is produced will be released. Then the luteal phase, what remains, the remains of the follicle, the changes in that takes place in luteal phase. In uterine cycle, you can see the changes in the uterus, the wall of the uterus, the endometrium. The menstrual flow is nothing but the wash off of the endometrium. Then again the uterus will start building again the endometrium walls, okay, in the secretory phase. So this is how the 2 cycles, 2 events takes place in the menstrual cycle. That's ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle. Okay. So coming back to the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle with the number of days. The first phase, that's the menstrual phase. Also we call it as menses, okay, or commonly called as periods, okay, occurring from 1 to 5 days, okay. So first day till the 5th day. So from 1st to 5th day is the menstrual phase, okay. What happens over here is the uterine lining breaks down, causing your period, okay. Then second phase is the follicular phase, okay, which is also termed as proliferative phase. It's from the 5th to the 13th day of the cycle. And what happens during this is the estrogen level will start increasing, and the uterine wall, okay, the uterus lining will start building up again, okay. That's follicular phase. And also the maturation of the follicles takes place inside the ovary. Then the ovulatory phase, it's roughly around the 14th day of the cycle, where the estrogen reaches its peak. LH, FSH hormones play a role, and the ovum or the ovulation takes place, where the ovary releases the ova inside the duct. Then last is the secretory phase. It's around 15th to the 28th day of the cycle. It's also called as luteal phase from the term corpus luteum, okay. The corpus luteum is the remains of the Graafian follicle. We'll come to it a little later, okay. So what happens during the secretory phase is the uterus lining, okay, continues to thicken, and if the ovum is not fertilized, okay, then the cycle will continue. It will come back to the first phase, that's the menstrual phase. So we shall discuss each of these phases in detail now. The first to fifth day is the menstrual phase, okay, where bleeding takes place, okay. It's called as menstrual flow, and it will last for about 3 to 5 days, sometimes even 7 days, okay. So if you can see, the endometrial shading takes place, which is called as menstrual flow, okay. Menstruation can occur only if fertilization does not take place, okay. If the ovum which is released by the ovary is not fertilized by the egg, then the menstruation will start. That's the breakdown of endometrial lining and the uterine blood vessel, which will come out through the vagina, okay, as a menstrual flow. Lack of menstruation means pregnancy. That is, if the egg is fertilized by the ovum, it will lead to the pregnancy, and that means that there is no menstruation. But sometimes you can see there is delayed menstruation, or the pattern is not regular. It can be also due to stress, poor hygiene, or poor health conditions, or changed living style. All these things can even lead to the hampered menstrual cycle, okay. The next is the follicular phase. What happens during the phase? Follicular, something related to follicles, okay. The follicles will mature at this stage. They will start growing. So it starts from after 5th day of the menstruation, and it gets completed within the 8 to 12 days, okay. And what happens? There is a role of hormones seen in this stage, that is gonadotrophins, FSH and LH, okay. Follicular stimulating hormone and LH, that is luteinizing hormone, which are secreted by the pituitary glands, okay. Now, what does FSH do? It helps in the development of primary follicles into Graafian follicles. So if you have the primary oocyte within the follicle will start growing, and it will mature into a Graafian follicle. And this Graafian follicle will secrete estrogen, okay. And what does this estrogen do? It will proliferate the rupture of uterine endometrium and mucous lining of oviduct and vagina. Now in the first phase, what had happened? The uterine lining, the endometrium was shed off, okay. Now in the second phase, the estrogen which is secreted, which will stimulate the proliferation of this ruptured uterine endometrium. So the endometrium will start building up again, okay, and also the mucous lining of the oviduct and the vagina, okay. Second thing what happens, or what is the role of estrogen, is also it is involved in the development of secondary sexual characters. Suppression of FSH secretion, okay, because every month only one follicle gets matured, okay. So here the FSH is start getting suppressed by the estrogen, and secretion of LH, that is luteinizing hormone. The third phase is the ovulatory phase. LH and FSH which was secreted at the follicular phase, here it will reach at its peak. Okay, it's the middle of the cycle now. So by the time it's 14th day, there is a rapid secretion of LH which is termed as LH surge, which induces the Graafian follicle, and the Graafian follicle will open and will release the secondary oocyte. Okay, and this process is called as ovulation, which takes place on the 14th day of the menstrual cycle. Okay, so what is ovulation? Release of the secondary oocyte from the Graafian follicle. Moving on to the, so here the picture is showing how ovulation takes place, how the secondary oocyte is released and it is getting collected by the fimbriae of the duct. Okay, that's this part of the duct is infundibulum, which collects, and then it will start moving and will reach the next part of the duct. Okay, where if the sperm reaches, the fertilization will take place. Okay. Moving on to the next phase, that's secretory phase, also called as luteal phase. So after ovulation, the Graafian follicle which is remain, okay, this yellow endocrine mass is now called a corpus luteum, and it is very important. Corpus luteum is involved in secretion of a hormone called as progesterone. And what is the role of the progesterone here? It makes the endometrium wall maximum vascular, thick and soft. Thus, uterus gets ready for implantation. Now the egg is released. Okay, the body has to prepare itself for pregnancy, because egg is released. If the sperm is come, the fertilization will take place. So now the endometrium has nicely formed ready for implantation. And who is sending the message to the endometrium is the progesterone. And who has secreted the progesterone? The corpus luteum. And what is the corpus luteum? It's the remains of the Graafian follicle. Once the secondary oocyte is released out, what remains is the corpus luteum. It also inhibits, the progesterone also inhibits the FSH secretion to prevent the development of the second ovarian follicle. So till now the ovary doesn't want to go for the formation of the second Graafian follicle, because there are chances of fertilization taking place. So the FSH has to be inhibited. So who does it? Is the progesterone. Okay. So if you can see here in the diagram, by the time it is the secretory phase, the endometrium lining has formed back again. Okay. So if now the fertilization does not take place, okay, the corpus luteum will degenerate, okay, and it will cause the disintegration of the endometrium, because corpus luteum was sending the message to the endometrium to be thick and be ready for implantation. Now there is no fertilization, the corpus luteum will disintegrate and it will lead to the next menstruation. So the cycle will repeat from phase 1 again and menses will start. Okay. So you can see here how the corpus luteum is disintegrating. Okay. And again the menstruation will begin, which will start with the menstrual flow. Fine. Now, if there is fertilization which will lead to pregnancy, and during pregnancy the events of the menstrual cycle will stop. There won't be any menstruation during the pregnancy. Okay. So, with this we come to the end of the menstrual cycle. So, we will just take overall changes what happens during the menstrual phases. With respect to the hormones inside the ovary and in the endometrium. So, if you see here, changes in the pituitary hormone, that's FSH and LH, that's luteinizing hormone, it reaches its peak during the ovulation, which is called as LH surge. Then changes in the ovary during the first menstruation phase, the primary oocytes, the primary follicles will start maturing. During the follicular phase, the follicles are maturing. During the ovulation, the follicle, graphene follicle is ruptured, the secondary oocyte is released. Then the luteal phase, that's called as the third phase. Okay, here the corpus luteum is developing, and if the fertilization does not take place, it will disintegrate. The changes in the estrogen and the progesterone level, if you say, the estrogen level is high during the ovulation, okay, and it is also seen both the estrogen and the progesterone activity is seen, especially the progesterone is involved in the building up of the endometrium. So, if you can see, the peak is increasing with the endometrium lining, and this is the endometrium lining. So, during the menstruation, the endometrium lining is shed off. During the follicular phase, it's trying to regain again. During the luteal phase, it reaches its max, and then it will go into the next cycle. Okay? So, this is the overall changes taking place during the menstrual phase. Now, what if fertilization takes place? How fertilization takes place? Now, for the fertilization to take place, the sperm has to enter the female genital tract, and the process is called as insemination. During a single copulation, a male releases around millions of sperms in the female reproductive tract. Over here, if you can see, the sperm cells are deposited in the vagina of females. Okay. Next, what happens? The sperms will swim inside the reproductive tract with the help of their tails and move towards the uterus. So, it has now reached the uterus. From there, the sperm will travel and reach the ampullary isthmic junction of the fallopian tube. Okay? So, this is where the fertilization has to take place. At the same time, the egg cell is released from the ovary and it will start moving towards the fallopian tube. So, if you can see here, the egg cell has released, the sperm has almost reached here, that is the ampulla isthmic junction, the egg cell, and now the fusion will take place, that is the sperm will come into contact with the egg from the ovary in this part. This part is called as ampullary isthmic junction. Okay? If you zoom this is what you can see. So, you can see many sperms which surround the egg, but if you can see here, this fellow, only one sperm fuses with the egg to form the zygote. Now, how is this possible? You can see many sperms, but how only one sperm enters the egg cell? This is what happens here during the fertilization. So, what is fertilization? The fusion of the male and the female gamete, that is the sperm and the ovum, okay, and where it occurs, that is the ampullary isthmic junction. Okay. So, if you can track or trace the movement of the sperm and the ovum. So, ovum from the ovary gets into the fimbriae of the duct, from there the infundibulum, from there the ampulla, and it reaches the ampullary region where the ampulla meets the isthmus, and from here the sperm due to insemination is released inside the vagina. From vagina it will move on through the cervical canal, it will reach the uterus and get into the duct of the ovary and will reach isthmus and the ampullary region. Okay. Now, fertilization will happen only if the ovum and the sperm is transported simultaneously. So, basically when the ovum is released, you can take plus or minus 1 day, so around 48 hours ovulation. Within the 48 hours of ovulation, if the sperm meets the ovum, then fertilization can take place. Okay. So, all the copulation cannot lead to fertilization. Only the copulation which happens during ovulation can lead to fertilization and which can lead to pregnancy. Okay. Now, the sperm which comes in contact with the zona pellucida. Now, have a look over here. If you recollect the structure of the ovum, we had discussed the outer wall of the ovum, that is zona pellucida. Now, it induces the changes in the membrane that what happens is the sperm, if you have recollect the structure of the sperm head has a cap-like structure called acrosome. The acrosome will secrete certain secretion which will have enzyme. Okay, now these enzymes, okay, will digest the zona pellucida, one region at the zona pellucida, and it will start entering inside. So the first thing is, if you just have a look at the diagram here, students, the sperm makes a contact with the egg, okay. The contact is over here, and this is the zona pellucida layer of the ovum. So this is the zona pellucida, this is the plasma membrane, and this is the egg cell, okay. Now here it is come into the contact with the egg cell. Now the acrosome is reacting with the zona pellucida. It is secreting a special type of enzymes called as hydrolytic enzyme, and it is encroaching inside. So the acrosome reacts and it will create a space and it will enter inside. Now once a sperm starts with reacting with the zona pellucida, once it enters, it so happens that the entry of other sperms are not possible, okay. So the membrane blocks the entry of the additional sperms, okay, once the first sperm comes into the contact with the zona pellucida. Fine. So then after this stage, the plasma membrane of the sperm and the egg fuse. So the membrane of the sperm and the egg will fuse here, and the sperm will release its nucleus inside the egg, okay. So here the sperm nucleus enters the egg, and then the fusion will take place, and at this stage the secondary oocyte will complete its second meiosis and will form the ovum, okay, and the polar body. The polar body will disintegrate, the ovum will fuse with the sperm nucleus, and the fertilization will take place to form a diploid zygote. How diploid zygote? You have a haploid sperm and the haploid ovum fusing together to give you a diploid zygote, okay. So next part is fertilization and implantation. Now what happens to this zygote? Okay, the zygote will now undergo mitotic division to increase in number of cells, okay. So the first stages when it undergoes mitotic division, it is called as cleavage. So if you can see here in this diagram, you have a oocyte which is fertilized by the sperm. The day one it is called as zygote. Zygote will start dividing, it will undergo stages called as cleavage, okay, from 4 cells to 8 cells, from 8 cells to 16 cells, and these cells are termed as blastomeres, okay. When the cells divide, these cells are termed as blastomere. So now as they are dividing, it's moving away from the isthmus and it is moving towards the uterus, because implantation has to take place inside the uterus, okay. Now the embryo which is getting formed is getting divided from 8 to 16 blastomeres. So when it reaches to 8 to 16 blastomere, it is termed as morula, okay. Here the embryo is termed as morula. The morula will continue to divide and transform into something called as blastocyst, this structure, okay. In blastocysts, the blastomeres are arranged into an outer layer. So if you can see here, in blastocyst, the outer layer is made up of the blastomeres, and the layer is termed as trophoblast, okay. And the inner cell mass is attached to the trophoblast. There is an inner cell mass there which is attached to the trophoblast, and it's this layer, that's the trophoblast layer, which will give nourishment to the inner cell mass, okay. And it will also get attached, the whole mass will now get attached to the endometrium. Till now it was not attached to anything, it was just moving from the ampullary region and will coming down from the duct to the uterus, and now it will start getting attached to the endometrium, which was ready for implantation, okay. The inner mass cells will get differentiated to form 3 germ layers, that is the outer ectoderm, Okay, the middle mesoderm and the innermost is the endoderm, and this 3-layered structure is called as gastrula, and the formation is called as gastrulation. Okay, so something like this, if you can have a look. Fertilization takes place followed by the cleavage from 2 to 4 cell, 4 to 8, 8 to 16. When it reaches around 16 stage, it is called as morula. The morula will further divide to form the blastomere. Okay, then there will be by the time there is implantation, there is already differentiation in the cell mass which is seen, and then this cell mass will get implanted on the uterine epithelium. Okay, and this is how the cells inside, the inner cells will divide to form the ectoderm, mesoderm and endoderm. Okay. So the implantation looks something like this. This is the endometrium. This is the uterine cavity. This is the endometrial epithelium. This is the blastocyst which has now come into the contact of uterine mucosa. The blastocyst will digest the cells here. Okay, it will start getting implanted inside, and you can see the endometrium covers over the embryo and it will take the blastocyst inside. So the implantation has taken place. So after the attachment of the uterine cell divide, it will completely cover the blastocyst, and this will result in something called as implantation. Okay. So if you can at a glance have a look at the fertilization and implantation, you have ovulation taking place in the ovary. The secondary oocyte is released. It will move towards the ampullary isthmic junction, meets the sperm. The fertilization takes place, forms the zygote. The zygote is a diploid structure which undergoes cleavage from 2 cells to 4 cells, 4 to 8 cells. It forms around 16 cell morula. From the morula it forms blastocyst, where the blastomeres arrange the outer layer, and the inner is the inner cell mass. The outer layer is called a trophoblast, and this blastocyst will now get implanted here. This is the walls of the uterine. So the implantation has taken place. So here we come to the end of the fertilization and the implantation portion. Okay. So here after fertilization, the blastocyst which is formed is now implanted, and now the development of the embryo to the fetus will take place. Okay. Okay. So with this we end the part of fertilization and implantation. Moving on to the next part, that's beginning of pregnancy and the embryonic development. How the embryo develop inside the female womb, okay, or inside the female uterus. Okay. So what happens after implantation is there are finger-like projection called as chorionic villi which will appear from the trophoblast. Trophoblast, remember, the outermost layer. Okay. So the finger-like projection, something like this, if you can see here, they are occurring from the trophoblast, and these chorionic villi are surrounded by the uterine tissue and the maternal blood. Maternal blood is mother's blood. Okay. This chorionic villi is integrated with the uterine tissue, and together it forms the placenta, and placenta is a structural and a functional part between, or the connection between the fetus and the mother. Okay. So it's a unit, functional and structural unit between the embryo and the maternal body. That's what connects the embryo to the maternal blood or the maternal body. Fine. So if you can just have a look over here, this is the chorionic villi. Along with the uterus, the uterine tissue, it forms the placenta. So the whole thing is the placenta. Placenta is connected to the fetus using a long cord called as umbilical cord. So this is the umbilical cord which arises from the fetus, and it gets connected to the placenta. The whole thing is the placenta, and this is the umbilical cord. Okay. And what does the umbilical cord do? It transports substances to and fro from the embryo. For example, it provides oxygen, nutrients and other hormones to the baby from the mother, and it carries water, carbon dioxide from the baby to the mother's tissue. Okay, so it's a channel or it's a passage for the to and fro of substances from the embryo to the mother. Okay, that's umbilical cord. What is the function of placenta? Placenta is a very important structure present there, important for the nourishment of the fetus, because that's the only connection between the fetus and the mother. So it acts as a barrier between the fetus and the mother. It supplies oxygen, nutrients from mother to the fetus. So this is one way, one channel. The other is it removes carbon dioxide and excretory wastes from the fetus. It acts as an endocrine gland and it secretes human chorionic gonadotrophin, human placental lactogen, estrogen, progesterone and relaxin. Relaxin is also secreted by the ovary. So if we can have a look here, this is the growing fetus, this is the umbilical cord, and this umbilical cord is connected to the placenta. This whole thing is the placenta, and this placenta is connected to the walls of the uterus. Okay? During pregnancy, it is seen that there are certain hormones which play a role, for example, estrogen, progesterone, cortisols, prolactin, thyroxine, which are seen getting increased in the maternal blood. Okay? And they support the fetal growth, metabolic changes in the mother and maintain pregnancy. If we can recollect, even the early pregnancy is detected by this means of hormones present in the maternal body. Okay, so these are the 6 key hormones which are seen playing role during the pregnancy. If you can just have a look at the diagram or the graphical representation, the first one is the human chorionic gonadotrophin. This graph is showing its growth from week wise of the pregnancy, from the 0 till the 40th week of pregnancy. And what does SCG do? It is produced by the placenta after implantation, and it supports the function of corpus luteum and temporary structure of ovaries, which is essential for pregnancy. Coming to the progesterone, okay, it is produced by the corpus luteum, fine, and it helps to establish the placenta, okay, and it stimulates the growth of the blood vessel. Estrogen, okay, it helps the growth of the uterus, maintains the lining, helps the fetus to grow the organs, to develop the organs. Prolactin, if you say, the release of the prolactin is seen increasing by the end of the pregnancy, by the time it is 40th week, because it is involved in the maturation, or it is involved in the production of the milk in the breast, to be precise, the mammary glands. Okay. Coming to relaxin, relaxin inhibits the uterine contraction. Okay. So during the pregnancy, it is secreted so that there is no uterine contraction taking place. And the last, oxytocin, if you can see, there is no role of oxytocin during the pregnancy, only during the last week, that's 40th week, and it is involved in the uterine contraction, which will lead to the last part, that is parturition. Okay. So coming back and recollecting the germ layers which we had discussed, the 3 germ layers, the ectoderm, mesoderm and the endoderm, and these are the layers which are involved in formation of different organs inside the fetus. Okay. So there is a mass of cells inside the blastocyst called as stem cells, which has potency to give rise to all the tissues and the organs. The endoderm layer, that's the internal layer, the innermost layer, is involved in the forming of lung cells, thyroid cells, digestive cells, basically the lining cells. Okay. The mesoderm, that's the middle layer, is involved in formation of the skeletal muscles, cardiac muscles, then the blood cells, mostly the muscle cells and the blood cells. Whereas the ectoderm is involved in the external layer, like for example skin, neuron, pigment cells, all these are formed from the ectoderm. Now, the duration of the pregnancy, okay, which is called as gestation period. In human beings, it is around 9 months, whereas for cats, it's only 2 months, dog also around 2 months, and elephants, if you can see, it's 21 months, students, okay. Now, what happens during this 9 months of gestation? At each month, you can see some certain development with respect to the organs and the parts of the body seen. Okay? So, for example, after 1 month, the human heart is formed. Soon after the 1 month, the functioning, so by the end of 6 weeks, total functional heart is present inside the fetus. Okay? By the end of the 2nd month, the limb, the digits are developed. By the end of 12 weeks, that's the 1st trimester, major organs like limbs, external genital organs and are well developed. During the 5th month, the first movement of the fetus and appearance of hair on the head, that's where after the 5th month you can see the fetus moving. The movement can be felt by the mother as well. End of the 24 weeks, that's 2nd trimester, the body is covered with the fine hair. The eyelids separates, the eyelashes are formed. Even the fetus can do the eye movements, okay. And by the end of 9 months, the fetus is ready for delivery. So, this is the growth pattern seen, how the embryo develops into the fetus and how all the organs are developed inside month or the week wise. And the last part, once the fetus is ready for delivery, the last part is parturition. Okay? So, the process of giving birth to young ones is called as parturition. Okay? It happens in 3 stages. Fine? How does it happen? It is induced by a neuroendocrine mechanism. The signals from the fetus, once the fetus is ready, the fetus inside the uterus is ready, it will signal it to placenta to induce mild uterine contraction, which is termed as fetal ejection relax, which will lead the uterus to contract and push the fetus outside the body through the vagina, okay. And this causes the release of oxytocin. Remember, oxytocin peak was high at the 40th week, okay, from the maternal pituitary. So, the first stage is the cervix, which is there, the canal. Okay, the cervix will dilate so that it will widen up so that the fetus can nicely move out of the uterus. And amnion, the amniotic sac which is there, will rupture. The second stage is the fetus is expelled from the uterus, it is coming out from the uterus. And how does this happen? The oxytocin which is now released is causing a stronger uterine muscle contraction, which in turn stimulates the further secretion of oxytocin. So, which is vigorous contraction of the uterus is taking place and the fetus is expelled out. This process of the fetus coming out is followed by the continued leading expulsion of the baby out of the uterus through the birth canal. So, the baby is coming out through the birth canal, and last, the third stage, once the baby comes out, the placenta is expelled out. So, after the parturition, the umbilical cord is cut off. So, the connection between the mother and the fetus, that was the umbilical cord, is cut off. The placenta and the remnants of the umbilical cords are expelled from the maternal body, okay, after parturition, and which is termed as afterbirth. So, it will come out in form of a bleeding, okay. So, this is where we end the part of sexual reproduction, where the parturition has taken place and the fetus has come out. Next, what? The nutrition part of the baby, that's lactation. Once the delivery has taken place, the mammary glands will start producing the milk. It almost starts producing the milk towards the end of the pregnancy, and the process is called as lactation. Okay. So once the baby suckles the nipple, okay, the mammary gland will release the milk. Okay. So the first milk, the yellowish milk produced during the initial few days of the lactation is called as colostrum, and it is very important for the health perspective of the baby because it is rich in several antibodies which is essential to develop the resistance in the newborn baby, because the baby is first time coming out in the external environment. It has to adapt well, it has to be resistant to various disease so that it can be protected, and these antibodies which are present in the colostrum are very much necessary. Okay. So this is, with this we come to the end of this chapter, students, that's human reproduction. We can just recollect on what we have studied with respect to the fertilization and implantation. A quick review starting from the fertilization. So this is showing how the sperm has reached the ovum in the ampullary region. Now the sperm will fuse with the corona radiata. The secondary oocyte will divide once the sperm fuses. Okay. Then the fertilization will take place. Fine. Once the fertilization takes place, the zygote is formed. The zygote divides, okay, and forms the blastomeres. The blastomeres keep on dividing till the 16th stage, which is morula. Again, further forming the blastocyst, which has the outer covering, that's trophoblast, and inner cell mass. The inner cell mass will divide further, will form the ectoderm, endoderm and mesoderm, which are involved in formation of different organs in the fetus. Okay. So in the whole chapter, these are the concepts which we dealt with. The first thing was the male reproductive system, the female reproductive system, gametogenesis, menstrual cycle, fertilization and implantation, pregnancy and embryonic development, and to end with is parturition and lactation. Okay. So this is where we come to the end of the chapter, students. I have next put in some questions and answers for you all for your reference, students. Now if you can have a note of it, it will be nice. So I have a questions and also answers put for you. Okay. We shall not discuss each of these in detail, but see that you have take a note of these. Okay. So you have the first question saying that write major functions of each, the ovary and the testes. The testes is involved in the production of gametes, that's spermatogenesis, and also secretes the hormone. The ovary involved in oogenesis secretes the hormone, that is progesterone. The next question is the structure of the seminiferous tubule. You have to mention everything over here, students, right from the outermost layer to the spermatogonia, the Sertoli cells, all the terms with their function should be involved in the answers. Most likely, students, from this chapter you are most likely you get 2 marks question and 3 marks question from this essay type questions. Okay. And the diagrams, I will show you the list of diagrams from the text which are probable to appear in your exams in the next coming slides. The next question is spermatogenesis, very important, the process of spermatogenesis. How the spermatogonial cells will divide by mitotic division, increase and forms primary spermatocytes, then undergoes meiosis 1 and 2 to form the secondary spermatocytes. From the secondary spermatocytes, they will further divide and form the spermatids. The spermatids will then mature into spermatozoa, that is sperm. Okay. The next is the hormones. Name the hormones which are involved in the regulation of spermatogenesis. The hormones are mentioned like luteinizing hormone, gonadotrophin, follicle stimulating hormone, androgen and inhibin. The functions of each are mentioned here. Definition of spermiogenesis and spermiation, very important, students. Most likely you get confused over here. There is a difference between spermiogenesis. Spermiogenesis is transformation of non-motile spermatids to the mature spermatozoa happens in the Sertoli cells, and spermiation, once the spermatozoa is matured, it is released inside from the Sertoli cell, it is released in the lumen of the seminiferous tubule. That's spermiation. Important, what is oogenesis? Okay, a brief account on oogenesis, right from the fetal stage, how the oocytes are formed, how it gets arrested, at which stage, the meiosis 1, the meiosis 2, okay. So, everything is included. So, this answer is there on 2 slides, students. So, here and ends with the last part, that is the maturation phase of the primary oocyte. Then the functions of the following, that is corpus luteum, endometrium, acrosome, sperm tail, fimbriae, all these functions are important, what they are involved in the process of reproduction. Next very important concept is menstrual cycle. Each phase is with the role of hormone. Very important, students. Please make a note of this. Parturition, what is parturition and which are the hormones related to this? So, process of the developed fetus coming out from the, expelling it out from the mother's womb is parturition. 2 hormones, that is oxytocin, which is involved in the uterine contraction, relaxing to relax the pelvic ligaments once the parturition has taken place. Okay. Now, these are some questions, students, which had appeared in the previous papers, especially the Goa board papers. Okay. Like explain the process of spermatogenesis, we already discussed the answer. Diagram of the structure of sperm. Remember, we had discussed the head, the neck, the middle part and the tail of the sperm. That diagram is very important, students. Then the process of fertilization in human female. Describe the process of human embryonic development during various months of pregnancy. Draw a neat label diagram of sectional view of human female reproductive system. Then the sectional view of seminiferous tubules in testes. Then the diagram of seminiferous tubules. So, you can see it is appearing again. Process of oogenesis, like we discussed. Difference between the phases of menstrual cycle. So, here it is asked the follicular phase and the luteal phase. Then the distinguish between the Sertoli cells and the Leydig cell. What is the difference? The Sertoli cell position, it is inside the seminiferous tubule, whereas the Leydig cells are in the interstitial tissue. Sertoli cells are involved in giving nourishment to the maturing sperm, whereas Leydig cells are involved in secretion of hormones. Then explain the sequence and the events occurring in the human zygote which leads to implantation. From the zygote to the cleavage, from cleavage to the blastocyst, morula and all those layers. Then the sectional view of female reproductive system diagram is asked again. The hormones involved in spermatogenesis, we have discussed this before. Hormones involved in menstrual cycle, the answer was discussed before. Again, sectional view of male reproductive system was asked. The placenta is the lifeline of developing fetus, justify. So, basically we are going to write here the functions of placenta, how it is involved in providing the nutrition to the growing fetus. Okay? And here are some of more questions. The Sertoli cells and the germ cells are important for sperm formation. So, what is the role? Basically, the question is what is the role of Sertoli cells and the germ cells? Okay. Now, male reproductive system diagram. Menstruation occurs only if released ovum is not fertilized. Explain. So, you have to explain the process. Okay, how the released sperm is not there, the corpus luteum will disintegrate, the disintegration of the corpus luteum will shed off the endometrium and the menstruation will take place. Okay. So, here are the diagrams from your text, please mark them, draw it on your book, students. Please learn to draw the diagram, because most of the time it is seen that students take diagrams very lightly and you often tend to lose your marks on diagrams. So when it comes to a diagram, students, most of the time you have to draw it scientifically correct diagram. The proportion has to be scientifically correct. It has to be neat, proportionate size. If you have the supplement given, don't draw the diagram in the full supplement and don't draw a small tiny diagram there where the teacher has to really struggle and look at the parts of it. Always a diagram has to be drawn in the pencil and neatly, okay. So this is the diagram showing diagrammatic view of the male reproductive system, the parts of the male reproductive system. Then you have the sectional view of the seminiferous tubule showing the cells inside the seminiferous. Make a note, students, of the figure number and mark it on the textbook, and please learn by drawing the diagram. Then this is the diagrammatic sectional view of a female reproductive system showing the ovaries, the ducts, then the uterus and the cervical canal and the vagina. This is the sectional view of the seminiferous tubule showing the cells inside, especially the spermatocytes and the Sertoli cells. Structure of sperm, very important, students. When you draw this, please draw a proportionate diagram. Now if you draw a head which is longer or it is taller than the tail, then the diagram is incorrect and you will lose marks there. Please see the proportion. The head, then the middle piece, and this is the tail. The tail is the longest part of the sperm, okay. So these are the diagrams. Okay, so see that you draw a scientifically correct diagram of sperm with a proportionate size. The next one is a sectional view of the ovary, wherein in this it is shown how the follicles are maturing into a Graafian follicle, how the ovum is released, and what remains is the corpus luteum, okay. Fine. So with this we come to the end of this chapter, students. Thank you so much. I wish you all the best for this year, especially due to we are facing this pandemic issue. I hope you are trying to take a maximum advantage of whatever matter is available to you, and see that you study well, students. I also take this opportunity to thank Prudent Media for giving me this opportunity and the Principals Forum to present over here this chapter in front of you, students. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Prudent Scholars, powered by Lupin Pharmaceuticals.